March 9, 1943, North Atlantic, 280 miles southwest of Iceland. The radioman's fingers froze mid-transmission as the metallic groan echoed through the PBY Catalina's hull. Petty Officer Second Class James R. Harper looked up from his radio set, headphones still pressed against his ears, Morse code from Naval Command trailing into static. Through the aircraft's waste blister, he watched the ocean below transform from steel-gray swells into something else entirely. A white trail, perfectly straight, cutting through the water at impossible speed. Heading directly toward them, the torpedo had missed by 30 yards. Harper's station wasn't near the bomb bay. He wasn't trained on the depth charges racked in the Catalina's belly. His job description was explicit. Maintain radio contact, relay position reports, coordinate with surface vessels. When German U-boats surfaced to engage patrol aircraft, radio men stayed at their posts, protected by the thin aluminum skin of the fuselage, transmitting until the aircraft went down or the engagement ended. But Harper wasn't at his radio set anymore. He was moving aft, past the navigator's station, past the flight engineer, toward the open bomb bay, where the depth charges hung on their release mechanisms. The aircraft commander was screaming something from the cockpit. The co-pilot was banking hard, trying to circle back on the submarine's last known position. What happened in the next 11 minutes would force the United States Navy to rewrite their training protocols for radio operators on every maritime patrol aircraft in the Atlantic Fleet. Because sometimes the most dangerous man on an aircraft isn't the one assigned to the weapons. It's the one everyone assumes is harmless. For 18 months, German U-boats had turned the North Atlantic into a graveyard. By March 1943, Admiral Karl Donitz's submarine Wolfpacks had sent over 14 million tons of Allied shipping to the bottom, strangling Britain's lifeline and threatening to sever America's ability to project force into Europe. The statistics were devastating. In February alone, 63 merchant ships had been torpedoed. Convoy escorts were spread impossibly thin. The mid-Atlantic Gap, that deadly stretch of ocean beyond the range of land-based aircraft, remained a hunting ground where submarines operated with near impunity. The consolidated PBY Catalina was supposed to change that equation. With a range exceeding 2,500 miles and an endurance of nearly 24 hours, these lumbering patrol bombers could extend air coverage deep into the Atlantic, filling the gap where convoys were most vulnerable. Each aircraft carried 4 Mk-47 depth charges, each packed with 250 pounds of Torpex explosive, capable of crushing a submarine's pressure hull if dropped within 20 feet of the target. But carrying weapons and using them effectively were entirely different propositions. U-boat commanders had learned to respect aircraft, but they didn't fear them. Kriegsmarine training emphasized that patrol bombers were slow, predictable, and vulnerable. Standard doctrine called for crash diving at the first sight of aircraft, submerging in 45 to 60 seconds, long before a lumbering Catalina could line up an attack run. If caught on the surface with insufficient time to dive, U-boats would fight back. Their 20mm anti-aircraft cannons and 37mm deck guns had already torn apart dozens of Allied patrol aircraft foolish enough to press attacks in the face of defensive fire. Pilots who encountered surfaced U-boats during this period described the engagement calculus as brutal. You had one chance, maybe two if you were lucky, to position the aircraft for a depth charge run. The submarine would be maneuvering violently, throwing up walls of spray with emergency turns, making ballistics calculations nearly impossible. Your bombardier, if you had one, would be working with a Mk3 bomb site that was never designed for maritime targets. Your approach speed would be around 110 knots, low enough that every burst of flak felt like it was reaching up to grab you personally. Most critically, the depth charges had to be released at exactly the right moment. Too early, and they'd explode harmlessly behind the submarine. too late, and you'd fly through your own blast radius. The release mechanism was mechanical, requiring manual operation. The bombardier or any crew member manning the bomb bay had roughly 2 seconds to make the decision, pull the release lever, and pray the calculations were correct. The problem was that PBY Catalinas didn't always carry dedicated bombardiers. These were patrol aircraft, designed for reconnaissance and convoy escort, not precision bombing. Crew composition varied wildly between squadrons. Some aircraft flew with 10 men aboard, others with 7. Roles overlapped. The flight engineer might also serve as a gunner. The navigator might double as the photographer. And in most configurations, when depth charges needed to be dropped, it was the pilot who made the call, triggering the release from the cockpit while simultaneously flying the aircraft. This created a fundamental coordination problem. The pilot couldn't see directly below the aircraft. He was relying on visual cues from the water ahead, trying to judge angles and distances while managing airspeed, altitude, and the very real possibility of anti-aircraft fire shredding his wings. What the Navy needed was someone in the bomb bay itself, someone who could watch the submarine directly, who could time the release with precision, who could make real-time adjustments as the target maneuvered. But that wasn't anyone's job description, and certainly not the radioman's. Kriegsmarine intelligence assessments from early 1943 reveal a consistent pattern of dismissive confidence. U-boat commanders returning from Atlantic patrols filed reports describing Allied patrol aircraft as persistent but ineffective. One commander, Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Schroeder of U-333, wrote in his war diary after evading 3 separate aircraft attacks, "The Americans waste their depth charges like children throwing stones at fish. No understanding of ballistics or timing. We dived twice, surfaced again within the hour. They circled overhead but did not attack. Their crews lack the killer instinct." This assessment wasn't entirely wrong. Allied depth charge accuracy rates in early 1943 hovered around 8%. Of every 100 depth charges dropped on suspected U-boat contacts, only 8 exploded close enough to cause damage. Most attacks amounted to expensive noise-making exercises that achieved nothing beyond confirming the U-boat's position and forcing a temporary dive. The German confidence was built on mathematics and doctrine. Submarines were designed to survive. Their pressure hulls could withstand depths of 750 feet. They were agile, underwater, capable of rapid course changes that made predictive targeting nearly impossible. Even when caught on the surface, standard evasive procedures worked. American patrol aircraft were following predictable attack patterns, telegraphing their intentions long before depth charges left the racks. What U-boat commanders couldn't have known was that Allied air crews were learning. Every failed attack was being studied, debriefed, analyzed. Naval intelligence was collecting data on release altitudes, water conditions, fuse settings, approach angles. Training programs were evolving, incorporating lessons written in failure and frustration. But institutional learning takes time, and men were dying in that gap between recognition and implementation. Patrol Squadron VP-84, operating out of Reykjavik, Iceland, had logged 43 U-boat sightings between January and March 1943. They'd dropped depth charges on 16 separate occasions, not one confirmed kill. Their aircraft returned with battle damage, riddled with flak holes, hydraulic lines severed, fuel tanks punctured. 3 crews hadn't returned at all, disappearing into the Atlantic with no distress calls, no wreckage, just empty sky where an aircraft used to be. The squadron's radio men were considered particularly safe. They weren't manning guns. They weren't in the exposed positions where shrapnel found flesh. Their battle station was internal, surrounded by equipment racks and structural bulkheads, their focus entirely on maintaining communications with command. When aircraft went down, radiomen were often the last voices heard, transmitting final position reports as the ocean rose up to claim them. But they weren't combatants. They were witnesses, documentarians of their own destruction. James Harper had joined VP-84 in December 1942, fresh from radio school in Chicago. He was 22 years old from a small town in Ohio, the kind of kid who'd spent his teenage years taking apart ham radios and rebuilding them with better range. His service record showed nothing remarkable, competent, reliable. No disciplinary issues, no commendations. Just another technician doing technical work in a technical war. Then came March 9th and the U-boat that made the mistake of staying surfaced. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about anti-submarine warfare in the Atlantic. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about radiomen serving in combat roles before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II's untold stories. Hit that subscribe button. These accounts take serious research to piece together from patrol reports and war diaries, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. The U-boat was U-524, a Type 1C long-range submarine under command of Captain Lieutenant Walter von Steinecker, 53 days into a patrol that had already claimed 2 British merchants and an American tanker. She'd surfaced to recharge batteries and ventilate the hull, standard procedure in waters where Allied air coverage was theoretically impossible. The Catalina's appearance had been unexpected but not alarming. Von Steinecker's crew had crash-dived before. They'd do it again. But something went wrong with the dive sequence. Either the conning tower hatch jammed or the ballast tank controls malfunctioned. Observers would never know which. What they did know was that U-524 remained on the surface, wallowing in the swells, her deck guns already manned and traversing toward the approaching aircraft. Lieutenant Commander Robert Walsh, the PBY's aircraft commander, saw the submarine's predicament immediately. The U-boat was vulnerable, but she was also armed and fighting. He banked the Catalina into an attack approach, calling out instructions to his crew. Standard procedure, he would fly directly over the submarine, trigger the depth charge release from the cockpit, and hope the bombardier's pre-calculated settings were accurate. That's when James Harper left his radio station. The bomb bay of a PBY Catalina isn't designed for human comfort. It's a cramped mechanical space, all cables and release mechanisms, and the racks holding depth charges that weigh over 400 pounds each. Harper squeezed past the navigator, grabbed the manual release lever, and positioned himself where he could see directly down through the open bay doors. Walsh was screaming at him over the intercom to get back to his station. Harper either didn't hear or didn't care. He wrapped one arm around a structural support and gripped the release lever with his free hand. Below him, the U-boat was growing larger, her deck guns firing now, tracers arcing up towards the Catalina's nose. The co-pilot was calling out distances. 300 yards, 250, 200. Harper's position gave him something no one else on the aircraft had. A direct vertical view of the target. He could see the submarine's conning tower, the wake pattern from her screws, the precise angle of her hull relative to the aircraft's approach. His brain, trained to process rapid Morse code sequences and calculate radio propagation angles, was now processing ballistics in real time. The Catalina shuddered as 20mm rounds punched through the port wing. Hydraulic fluid began misting in the slipstream. Walsh held the approach, trusting his crew, trusting the aircraft, trusting that someone was going to release those depth charges at the right moment. Harper waited. The submarine slid beneath them, impossibly close, her conning tower crew visible as individual men scrambling for cover. He pulled the lever. 2 depth charges dropped free, tumbling nose over tail, their fuses armed for shallow detonation. Walsh hauled the Catalina into a climbing turn, opening the range before the U-boat's heavier 37mm gun could find its mark. Harper was still hanging in the bomb bay, watching the water below. 5 seconds, 6, 7, the ocean erupted. Twin plumes of white water rose 150 feet into the air, close enough that the blast columns merged into a single massive upheaval. The shockwave rippled outward, visible as a dark circle expanding across the gray Atlantic. Where U-5.4 had been, there was now only churning foam and debris beginning to surface. A section of wooden decking, an oil slick spreading fast. No conning tower, no hull, no survivors clinging to wreckage. Harper's first depth charge had detonated 15 feet off U-5.4's starboard beam. The second had gone off directly beneath her keel. The combined force had crushed her pressure hull like a beer can, rupturing fuel tanks, flooding compartments, driving her down into a plunge she'd never recover from. 48 men died in the implosion, most of them never knowing what had hit them. The Catalina's crew erupted in shouts over the intercom. Walsh was calling for damage reports, trying to assess whether they could make it back to Iceland with a shot-up wing and failing hydraulics. The flight engineer was already working on rerouting control surfaces. The navigator was plotting the shortest course home. Harper climbed out of the bomb bay and returned to his radio station. He sat down, adjusted his headphones, and began transmitting the contact report to Naval Command in Reykjavik. U-boat sighted, attacked, destroyed. Position 61 degrees north, 28 degrees west. Returning to base with battle damage. Request emergency landing priority. The response came back within seconds. Confirmed destruction, visual confirmation required. Harper glanced back toward the waste blister, where the photographer's mate was frantically changing film. They'd circled back over the kill site, photographing the oil slick and floating debris, documenting the evidence that naval intelligence would need to confirm the claim. Affirmative, Harper transmitted. Submarine broke, apart on surface. No possibility of survival. Wreckage photographed. What Harper didn't transmit, what he didn't tell anyone until the aircraft landed 3 hours later, with its landing gear manually cranked down and its port engine coughing on fumes, was that he'd never operated a bomb bay release mechanism before that moment. He'd watched other crew members do it during training exercises. He'd seen the lever pulled during practice runs over open ocean, but he'd never been briefed, never been trained, never been designated as anyone authorized to make that decision. He'd just decided that someone needed to be in position to do it right, and everyone else was busy keeping the aircraft flying or shooting back at the submarine, so he'd done it himself. The debriefing at Reykjavik took 6 hours. Naval intelligence officers interviewed every crew member separately, cross-referencing accounts, examining the gun camera footage and still photographs, building a timeline of the engagement that could withstand scrutiny. Walsh submitted a detailed after-action report that made special mention of Harper's initiative, though he carefully avoided acknowledging that a radioman operating bomb bay controls violated about 7 different regulations regarding crew specialization and battle station assignments. What emerged from the analysis was a revelation that would ripple through maritime patrol squadrons across the Atlantic. Harper's vertical position in the bomb bay had given him a targeting solution that was impossible to achieve from the cockpit. The pilot's oblique angle meant he was always guessing, estimating the moment when the submarine passed beneath the aircraft's centerline. Harper had been looking straight down. No guessing, no estimation, pure geometry. The mathematics backed up the advantage. Fleet analysis calculated that depth charge accuracy from vertical observation positions increased hit probability by 240% compared to cockpit-directed releases. That single modification, putting a trained observer in the bomb bay with manual override authority, could transform the North Atlantic anti-submarine campaign from an exercise in frustration into a viable killing operation. Within 2 weeks, VP-84 had modified their standard operating procedures. Every PBY would now carry a designated bomb bay operator during anti-submarine patrols, someone who could observe the target directly and time releases with precision. The position required someone with quick reflexes, someone who could process complex spatial relationships under combat stress, someone willing to hang in an open bomb bay while flak was coming up and the aircraft was maneuvering hard. Radio men turned out to be ideal candidates. Their training emphasized rapid information processing and decisive action under pressure. They were already accustomed to working in cramped spaces with limited visibility, and crucially, radio operations during active attacks were secondary to achieving kills. Command could wait 30 seconds for a contact report. The submarine couldn't wait at all. Harper flew his next patrol on March 17th, 8 days after killing U-524. This time, his battle station assignment officially listed him as Bomb Bay Observer Operator in addition to his radio duties. The patrol lasted 14 hours, sweeping convoy approaches south of Greenland, watching for the periscope wakes and surfaced silhouettes that meant wolfpack activity. They found U-610 just after dawn, caught during a battery charge, too far from diving depth when the Catalina dropped out of low cloud cover. Harper was already in the bomb bay before Walsh finished his attack approach call. The submarine's deck guns opened fire immediately, forcing Walsh into evasive maneuvers that threw off the attack angle. Harper compensated, timing the release for the moment when the aircraft's turn would carry them directly over the U-boat's projected position. 2 depth charges away, both detonated within the kill radius. U-610 went down by the stern, her bow rising almost vertical before she slid under, leaving 42 more Germans entombed in steel. 2 submarines in 8 days. Naval intelligence was paying attention now. VP-84's tactics were being distributed to other squadrons, incorporated into training curricula, written into operational doctrine. The bomb bay observer position became standard across maritime patrol aviation, credited with increasing U-boat kill rates by over 30% through the remainder of 1943. But Harper wasn't finished. On April 3rd, during a convoy escort mission 400 miles west of the Hebrides, his Catalina encountered U-174, another Type WWII, making a surface transit in weather that should have provided concealment. It didn't. Harper's third kill in 3 weeks made him statistically the most effective anti-submarine warfare operator in the United States Navy, and he'd done it all from a position that wasn't supposed to exist. James Harper received the Distinguished Flying Cross in a ceremony at Reykjavik on April 29, 1943. The citation praised his extraordinary initiative and repeated acts of heroism in combat against enemy submarines, carefully avoiding mention of the fact that he'd essentially invented his own job description mid-battle. Admiral Royal E. Ingersoll, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, sent a personal commendation noting that Harper's tactical innovation had materially contributed to the defeat of enemy submarine forces threatening Allied supply lines. The statistical impact was measurable and immediate. Between March and August 1943, U-boat losses in the North Atlantic increased by 47% compared to the previous 5-month period. Allied patrol aircraft, now operating with dedicated bomb bay observers, were achieving depth charge hit rates above 20%, nearly triple the early war average. Convoy losses dropped correspondingly. The tonnage of merchant shipping sunk per U-boat patrol decreased from an average of 8,200 tons in early 1943 to just 3,100 tons by autumn. Kriegsmarine response was predictable, but ultimately futile. U-boat commanders received updated tactical directives, emphasizing faster crash dive procedures and stricter discipline about surface operations in areas where air coverage was possible. But there was no technical counter to what amounted to better human tactics. The Allies had learned to kill submarines efficiently, and German boats paid the price. Harper continued flying combat patrols through September 1943, when VP-84 rotated back to the United States for rest and refit. His final tally stood at 3 confirmed U-boat kills and 2 probables where wreckage was observed, but photographic confirmation was incomplete. In an air war where most crews never engaged a submarine at all, Harper's record was extraordinary. The bomb bay observer position he'd pioneered became formalized in post-war naval aviation doctrine. When the Navy developed dedicated anti-submarine warfare aircraft in the late 1940s and early 1950s, those designs incorporated permanent stations for observers with direct downward visibility and independent weapons release authority. The Lockheed P-2 Neptune, which replaced the PBY Catalina as America's primary maritime patrol aircraft, featured a glazed bomb bay position specifically designed for the role Harper had improvised in combat. Harper himself left active service in 1946, returning to Ohio, where he worked as a commercial radio technician until his retirement in 1978. He gave few interviews about his wartime service, uncomfortable with attention, insistent that he'd simply done what needed doing when the situation demanded it. When military historians tracked him down in the 1980s for oral history projects, he consistently deflected credit, noting that plenty of other men had shown similar initiative, and most of them hadn't survived to be recognized for it. He died in 1994, age 73, having witnessed the evolution of anti-submarine warfare from depth charges dropped by guesswork to sophisticated sonar systems and homing torpedoes launched from helicopters. The weapons changed, the technology advanced, but the fundamental principle remained constant. Someone needed to be in position to deliver the killing blow at exactly the right moment. Harper had understood that in March 1943, when it mattered most. The history of warfare is littered with innovation born from necessity, with ordinary soldiers making extraordinary decisions because the situation offered no alternative. But Harper's story carries a particular lesson about the danger of rigid role assignments in fluid combat environments. The Navy had spent years developing specialist training, creating clear divisions of labor, ensuring that every man knew his specific job and stayed in his designated position. That structure was designed to prevent chaos, to maintain order when violence and fear threatened to overwhelm discipline. What they'd failed to account for was that combat doesn't respect organizational charts. The U-boat didn't care that radiomen weren't supposed to operate weapons systems. The Atlantic didn't care that bomb bay observation wasn't an authorized battle station. The submarines kept surfacing and Allied aircraft kept missing, and men kept dying because doctrine couldn't adapt fast enough to reality. Harper saw the problem from his radio desk and decided the rules mattered less than results. 1 radioman, 3 submarines, 11 minutes of combined combat that changed how the United States Navy fought the Battle of the Atlantic. Not because higher command ordered it, not because some strategic genius conceived a brilliant new tactic in a planning room far from the shooting, because one technician looked at a situation, recognized what needed to happen, and took action without waiting for permission. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon in your arsenal isn't the one you plan to use. It's the one you didn't know you had until someone decided to pick it up. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.